My stepfather always said my real dad was a deadbeat, until I found the child support checks he'd been hiding for 12 years. I was 17 when I found them, buried in a shoebox behind winter coats in my stepfather's closet. I was looking for my birth certificate for college applications when my fingers hit the cardboard corner. Inside were dozens of checks, all made out to my mother, all signed by Dennis Crawford, my biological father, all with child support written in the memo line. The earliest was dated 3 months after my 5th birthday. The most recent was from last week. Every single check had been endorsed and deposited by my stepfather. My hands shook as I counted them. Over $80,000 in 12 years. Money that was supposed to be for me. For school clothes, doctor visits, college savings. Money my stepfather had been stealing while telling everyone my real dad abandoned us. He never even tried to contact you, Gary would say whenever I asked about my father. Some men just aren't built to be fathers. I'd grown up believing I was unwanted, that my dad had walked away without looking back. Gary painted himself as the hero who stepped in to raise another man's kid out of the goodness of his heart. But here was proof that my father had been trying to take care of me all along. I photographed every check with my phone, my heart pounding. Then I carefully put everything back exactly how I'd found it. That night at dinner, Gary complained about money again. College is expensive, he said. Maybe you should consider community college first. I stared at him across the table. This man who'd been stealing from his own stepchild for over a decade while pretending to be struggling financially. What if I found another way to pay for it? I asked carefully. Like what? Your deadbeat father's finally going to step up? He laughed bitterly. Don't hold your breath. After dinner, I called the number on the return address from the most recent check. My hands were trembling as I dialed. Hello? The voice was unfamiliar, but warm. Is this Dennis Crawford? I asked. Silence. Then, who's asking? This is Ren Patterson. I think you might be my father. I heard him suck in a sharp breath. Ren? Oh my God. Ren, is that really you? You know who I am? I've been trying to reach you for 12 years, he said, his voice breaking. I've sent letters, emails, gifts. I've called your house dozens of times. Your mother and stepfather said you didn't want contact with me. My world tilted. They said what? They told me you were happy with your new family. That contact with me would be confusing and harmful. They said if I really loved you, I'd stay away. I couldn't breathe. And the child support? Every month for 12 years. $700 a month, sometimes more for school expenses and birthdays. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed, even if I couldn't be there. The room started spinning. Not only had Gary been stealing my father's money, but he'd been actively keeping us apart. We agreed to meet the next day after school at a coffee shop across town. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, processing 13 years of deception. I recognized him immediately from old photos my grandmother had hidden. He was tall with dark hair and kind eyes that looked exactly like mine. When he saw me, he started crying. You look just like your mother did at your age, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. We talked for 4 hours. He showed me pictures of himself at every one of my birthdays, holding gifts he'd tried to send. Letters he'd written, but were returned unopened. I never missed a soccer game, he said quietly. I'd sit in my car in the parking lot just to watch you play. Gary saw me once and threatened to call the police. When I got home that evening, they were both waiting in the living room. Gary's face was dark with anger. Where were you? He demanded. At work, I lied, just like they'd been lying to me for years. Really? Because Marissa's mom saw you at Coffee Central with some man. My mother looked worried. Ren, who were you with? I took a deep breath. I'd planned to confront them gradually, maybe gather more evidence first. But looking at their faces, Gary's controlling rage and Mom's feigned concern, I couldn't pretend anymore. I was with my father, I said. The color drained from both their faces. Gary stood up so fast his chair fell backward. That's impossible. You don't know how to contact him. Really? Because he's been trying to contact me for 12 years. Funny how you forgot to mention that. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Ren, we can explain. Can you explain this? I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos of the checks. $80,000 in child support that you've been stealing while telling me my father abandoned me? Gary lunged for my phone, but I was faster. You little bitch. You have no idea what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm exposing a 12-year fraud. The moment those words left my mouth, I saw Gary's mask slip completely. For years, he'd been the concerned stepfather, the man who sacrificed to raise another man's child. Now I saw what my mother must have fallen for, the charm that hid something much darker underneath. You ungrateful little whore, he snarled. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. There it is, I said calmly. The real Gary, the one who's been stealing from a child for over a decade. Mom was crying now, but I couldn't tell if it was from shock or guilt. You don't understand. We were protecting. From what? From having a father who loved me? From the money he sent to take care of me? The house suddenly felt suffocating. All those years of Gary's lectures about responsibility and family value. All those times he'd made me feel guilty for wanting things we couldn't afford while he was literally stealing my inheritance. I remembered being 12 and begging for new cleats because mine had holes. Gary had gone on a 20-minute rant about entitled children and the value of hard work. 2 weeks later, he'd bought himself a $3,000 motorcycle. I remembered crying when my laptop died during freshman year, knowing I couldn't ask for a replacement because money was always tight. Gary had sighed dramatically and said maybe I should get a job if I wanted nice things. That same month, he'd joined an expensive golf club. Every financial struggle we'd supposedly faced, every sacrifice I'd been asked to make, every time I'd felt guilty for wanting what other kids had, it was all bullshit. The money was there. It had always been there. From disappointment, Gary exploded, snapping me back to the present. Your father is a loser who knocked up your mother and couldn't handle the responsibility. He's been sending $700 a month for 12 years. That doesn't sound like someone who can't handle responsibility. That money was better invested in this family, Gary said, as if he was doing me a favor. I used it to improve our house, pay our bills. You benefited from it. You used it to buy yourself a boat, I shot back, and a motorcycle, and that expensive watch collection. Don't pretend you were noble. Gary's face turned red. I earned that money. I'm the one who's been here every day, dealing with your attitude, your problems, your needs. Your father sends a check and thinks that makes him a parent? You know what makes someone a parent? Actually wanting to be in their child's life, something you prevented for 12 years. Mom finally found her voice. Gary told me your father was dangerous, that he had anger issues, that contact would be harmful. And you believed him? Without question? For 12 years? I was protecting you, she repeated weakly. You were protecting yourself. It was easier to have Gary handle everything than deal with a complicated custody situation. The truth was starting to crystallize in ways I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about stolen money. This was about a systematic campaign to erase my father from my life so Gary could play the hero. I thought about all the Father's Day cards I'd been encouraged to make for Gary, all the times people praised him for stepping up to raise another man's child, all the times I'd felt obligated to be grateful for his presence in my life. Meanwhile, my real father had been watching from parking lots, sending money he probably couldn't afford, and being told his own daughter didn't want to see him. Gary stepped closer, his voice threatening. You're going to stop this right now. You're going to block his number and never see him again. And if you even think about telling anyone about those checks, you'll what? I stood up, no longer the scared little girl who used to hide when he raised his voice. You'll hit me? Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Control. Gary had never actually hit me, but he'd perfected the art of intimidation. The raised voice, the looming presence, the threats that never quite crossed the line into actionable abuse. He'd trained me to back down, to apologize, to make myself smaller. Not anymore. I raised you. I fed you. I put a roof over your head. With my father's money, I said. Money you stole. Gary's face twisted with rage. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Then Mom grabbed his arm. Gary, stop. Just stop. He shook her off and stormed toward his office. I heard him slamming drawers, probably moving the evidence. It's too late, I called after him. I already photographed everything. Mom collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. How did this happen? How did everything get so complicated? It got complicated when you chose to lie to me for 13 years. I sat down across from her, studying the woman who'd given birth to me, but had let someone else decide whether I had a relationship with my father. She looked older than her 42 years, worn down by whatever dynamic she had with Gary. I thought I was doing the right thing. Gary said your father was unreliable, that he'd hurt you the way he hurt me. How did he hurt you, Mom? Because from what he told me, you guys just grew apart after I was born. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it to me. Mom took a shaky breath, and for the first time in years, she actually looked me in the eyes while talking about my father. Your father and I were young, too young. When I got pregnant, he wanted to get married immediately. I wasn't ready. I wanted to finish college first. So, he became obsessive, calling constantly, showing up at my dorm, talking about our future family. When I said I needed space, he couldn't handle it. I thought about the man I'd met that afternoon, patient, kind, willing to wait 12 years for a chance to see his daughter. That doesn't sound dangerous. That sounds like a scared kid who was trying to do the right thing. Maybe. But when I finally broke up with him, he fought the decision. He kept trying to win me back even after I'd moved on. Moved on to Gary? She nodded. I met Gary at work. He was older, stable, confident, everything your father wasn't. And Gary convinced you that Dad was dangerous? Gary said men like your father don't change, that he'd always be possessive and controlling, that it would be better for everyone if we made a clean break. The irony wasn't lost on me. Gary calling someone else possessive and controlling. So you let Gary intercept every attempt Dad made to contact me? You let him steal my child support? You let me grow up thinking I was unwanted? I thought it would be easier for you to have one stable father figure than to be confused by two men. That wasn't your choice to make. Gary returned from his office, his face grim. I've called my lawyer. If you pursue this, we'll claim your father coerced you into these meetings, that he's manipulating you against your family. Good luck with that. I have 12 years of documented financial fraud. That money was used for family expenses, perfectly legal. Not when you forged endorsements on checks made out to someone else. His confidence faltered slightly. Your mother endorsed those checks. My mother's name isn't on half of them, and even if it was, child support is for the child, not the stepfather's hobbies. Mom looked between us, finally understanding the full scope of what Gary had done. You forged my signature? Gary's jaw tightened. Only when you weren't around to sign them yourself. How many times? She demanded. Does it matter? We're a family. What's mine is yours. Except it wasn't yours, I said. It was mine. I watched my mother's face as the reality sank in. She'd enabled this for years, sure, but she was also Gary's victim in a way. He'd manipulated her just like he'd manipulated me, just in different ways. The front door opened and my grandmother walked in, using her spare key as usual. She took one look at our faces and set down her purse. What's going on here? She asked. Before anyone could stop me, I blurted out everything. The hidden checks, the stolen money, the blocked contact with my father. Grandma's face grew darker with each revelation. When I finished, she turned to Gary with pure disgust. You're a thief and a manipulator. Stay out of this, Ruth. This is between us and Ren. Ma, this involves my granddaughter and my late husband's money. What does Grandpa have to do with this? I asked. Grandma's eyes never left Gary's face. Your grandfather left you a college fund, $20,000. I gave it to your mother when you turned 16. My stomach dropped. What happened to it? Mom looked at Gary, who suddenly found the floor very interesting. Gary said he invested it. Mom whispered. He said it would grow better in the stock market. Which stocks? Grandma demanded. Gary mumbled something about diversified portfolios. That's bullshit and you know it, Grandma snapped. You spent it, didn't you? Just like you spent the child support. I felt something break inside me. The college fund my grandfather had carefully saved. Gone. Just like the child support. Just like 12 years of a relationship with my father. I resent the implication. I resent having a thief in the family. Grandma cut him off. She turned to me. Pack your bags. You're coming to stay with me while we figure this out. She's not going anywhere, Gary said, moving to block the stairway. That's when I pulled out my secret weapon. While they'd been arguing, I'd been texting my father and sharing my location. The doorbell rang. Gary's face went white. You called him? I called my dad. I opened the door and there he was, with a man in a suit beside him. This is my lawyer, Mr. Torres, Dad said calmly. We're here to discuss the return of stolen funds and establishment of proper custody arrangements. Gary tried to slam the door, but Dad's foot was already in the frame. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Mr. Torres said, holding up a briefcase. But we're doing it today. The next 2 hours were a blur of legal documents, threats, and revelations. Mr. Torres laid out exactly how much trouble Gary was in. Fraud, forgery, theft, parental alienation. The evidence was overwhelming. But as the night wore on, more details emerged that made the situation even worse than I'd imagined. Your stepfather didn't just intercept checks, Mr. Torres explained, pulling out a thick folder. He actively impersonated your mother in correspondence with your father. Look at this. He showed us printed emails, supposedly from my mother, saying I was happy and didn't want contact with my biological father. The writing style was nothing like how my mother actually communicated. I never sent these, Mom said, her voice barely audible. Gary had access to your email account, Mr. Torres continued. He's been responding to your ex-husband's attempts at contact for years, always discouraging any meeting. Dad pulled out his phone and showed us years of text messages, cruel responses to his birthday wishes for me, dismissive replies to his offers to attend school events, all coming from my mother's number. I thought you hated me, he said to Mom. I thought you were actively trying to keep me away. Mom was sobbing now. I never said any of those things. I didn't even know you were trying to contact us. Because Gary was controlling all the communication, I said, the full scope of his manipulation finally clear. It wasn't just theft. It was identity theft, impersonation, and systematic isolation. Gary had built a wall between my father and our entire family, brick by brick, lie by lie. Your options are limited, Mr. Torres told Gary. You can return the money voluntarily and agree to modified custody, or we can pursue criminal charges and let the courts decide. How much? Mom asked quietly. The child support, the college fund, and interest. About $110,000. I watched Gary's face crumble as he realized his expensive lifestyle was about to end. We don't have that kind of money, he said. Then you'll need to sell some assets. The boat, the motorcycle, the watch collection, maybe even the house. This is my home, Gary protested. Built with stolen money, Dad pointed out. Money meant for my daughter's future. As the negotiations continued, I found myself studying Gary in a way I never had before. This man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework and attended school plays. But underneath it all, he'd been systematically destroying my relationship with my father for his own selfish reasons. The worst part was realizing how good he was at it. The way he'd isolated us from Dad while making himself look like the hero. The way he'd convinced my mother that cutting contact was for my own good. The way he'd made me feel guilty for even asking about my father. It was psychological warfare disguised as family values. I want to understand something, I said during a break in negotiations. Why? Why go to all this trouble? Why not just let me have a relationship with my dad? Gary looked at me with something between pity and disgust. Because you don't understand how the world works. Your father would have filled your head with ideas about how I wasn't good enough, how your mother should have stayed with him. He would have poisoned you against us. So instead, you poisoned me against him? I protected this family. You protected yourself. You were threatened by the idea that I might love someone else, that I might figure out you weren't the saint you pretended to be. The negotiations continued until nearly midnight. In the end, Gary agreed to return what he could immediately and set up a payment plan for the rest. In exchange, we wouldn't press criminal charges, but the custody arrangement was non-negotiable. I would spend weekends with my father and have unlimited contact. Mom would have to attend family therapy to address the emotional damage caused by years of lies. As everyone prepared to leave, Gary pulled me aside one last time. You've destroyed this family, he hissed. I hope you're happy. I didn't destroy anything. I exposed what was already broken. Your mother will never forgive you for this. I looked over at Mom, who was apologizing to my father through tears. Maybe not, but at least now she knows the truth. Dad drove me to Grandma's house that night. As we pulled into her driveway, he turned to me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said. I should have fought harder. I should have found a way. You tried. That's more than I knew for 12 years. I missed so much of your life. Then let's not waste any more time. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of revelation and adjustment. Gary moved out, taking only his clothes in the car. The house was put up for sale immediately to help cover what he owed. Mom found a smaller apartment and started individual therapy to deal with the years of manipulation she'd endured. It turned out Gary had been controlling her finances too, monitoring her emails and gradually isolating her from friends and family. I didn't realize how trapped I'd become, she admitted during one of our family therapy sessions. He made every decision seem like it was for the good of the family, but really it was about maintaining control. Dad and I spent those weeks getting to know each other. He showed me photo albums he'd kept of my school events, pictures taken from a distance because he wasn't allowed closer. He'd kept every newspaper clipping mentioning my name, every program from school plays he'd watched from the back row. I was there for your science fair in 6th grade, he said, pointing to a photo of me standing next to my volcano project. You were so proud when it actually erupted. I looked for you in the crowd, I admitted. Gary said you probably didn't care about stuff like that. I cared about everything, every game, every recital, every award ceremony. I just had to watch from the shadows. The hardest part was realizing how much time we'd lost. 12 years of birthdays, holidays, milestones, 12 years of getting to know each other, 12 years of him being painted as the villain while Gary played the hero. But there were also beautiful discoveries, like how we both loved old movies and terrible puns, how we both got anxious in crowds but energized by deep conversations, how we both had the same weird habit of reorganizing things when we were stressed. You get that from me, he said, watching me alphabetize Grandma's spice rack while processing everything that had happened. Your mother used to say I'd reorganize the same bookshelf 10 times when I was worried about something. 3 months after the confrontation, Gary's lawyer called. Gary wanted to meet with me privately. No lawyers, no family members, just us. Against everyone's advice, I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Gary looked terrible, thinner, older, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from having your whole world collapse. I know you hate me, he started. I don't hate you. I pity you. He flinched like I'd slapped him. I want you to know that I really did think I was protecting you. From what? From being disappointed. From being hurt. Your father, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Your father was young and irresponsible when you were born. I thought he'd let you down eventually, and it would be better if you never got attached. So you made that decision for me. I made the decision any father would make to protect his child. You're not my father. The words hung in the air between us. For 12 years, I'd called him Dad. For 12 years, he'd been the primary father figure in my life. But blood wasn't what made him not my father. It was the lies, the manipulation, the theft of my relationship with my real dad. I raised you, he said quietly. You controlled me. There's a difference. We sat in silence for a while. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to make him understand the depth of the damage he'd caused. But another part of me just felt sad for him. This man who'd been so threatened by my biological father that he'd spent 12 years building an elaborate lie. I know I can't undo what I did, he said finally, but I want you to know that I did love you. In my own way, I did love you. I know, I said, but love without respect isn't really love. It's possession. Gary nodded, tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. After he left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, processing the conversation. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was something. An acknowledgement of the damage done, and a recognition that there was no going back. The house sold 6 months later. Mom used her portion to pay Dad back as much as possible, and to start over in a new city where Gary couldn't find her. She'd finally realized that their entire relationship had been built on his need to control and her willingness to be controlled. I feel like I'm meeting myself for the first time in 15 years, she told me during one of our phone calls. I'd forgotten who I was before Gary. Dad and I settled into a routine. Weekends at his place where I met his wife Sarah and my half-brother Connor. They welcomed me with an openness that contrasted sharply with the tension that had always existed in Gary's house. Sarah had known about me from the beginning of her relationship with Dad. She'd been encouraging him to keep fighting for contact even when it seemed hopeless. He never stopped talking about you, she told me. He'd show me pictures from your school website and tell me stories about what you were like as a little kid. You were always part of our family, even when you didn't know it. Connor, who was 8, was thrilled to have a big sister. He peppered me with questions about high school and begged me to teach him to drive, which I couldn't do for obvious reasons, but I promised to when he was older. Do you think Mom and Gary will get back together? Connor asked one day while we were building a fort in Dad's backyard. I don't think so, I said gently. Sometimes when people hurt each other really badly, they can't fix it. Good, he said matter-of-factly. Gary was mean to you. Dad cried when he told us what Gary did. It was strange, building a relationship with a brother I'd never known existed. But Connor and I clicked immediately. He had Dad's sense of humor and an 8-year-old's brutal honesty that I found refreshing after years of Gary's manipulation. The legal proceedings took almost a year to fully resolve. Gary did pay back most of what he owed, though it required selling everything he'd bought with my money. The boat, the motorcycle, the watch collection, even the house. He moved to another state and took a job selling insurance. Last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment and driving a 15-year-old car. The expensive lifestyle he'd built on stolen money was gone. Mom slowly rebuilt her relationship with Dad. It wasn't romantic. That ship had sailed long ago. But they managed to become friendly co-parents. She apologized repeatedly for enabling Gary's behavior. And Dad, being the kind of person he was, forgave her. We were all victims of Gary's manipulation, he said. The important thing is that we don't let him continue to damage our family. As my senior year of high school progressed, I found myself changing in ways I hadn't expected. The constant tension that had defined my home life was gone. For the first time in years, I could relax. I could be myself without worrying about Gary's disapproval or manipulation. My grades improved. My anxiety decreased. I started making plans for college with the confidence that comes from knowing your family actually supports you. Dad helped me apply to universities, something Gary had actively discouraged. Community college builds character, Gary used to say, while secretly planning to keep me close so he could maintain control. Now I had options, real options, backed by the child support money that was finally being used for its intended purpose. What do you want to study? Dad asked one afternoon as we reviewed application essays. Criminal justice, I said without hesitation. Family law, specifically. I want to help kids who are being kept from their parents. Dad smiled. That's my girl. The day I got my college acceptance letter, I called Dad first, then Grandma, then Mom. For the first time in my life, I had a whole family celebrating my achievements instead of just one man deciding whether they were worthy of recognition. Gary had tried to reach out a few times over the months, usually when he was drinking if the timestamps on his messages were any indication, rambling texts about how I'd ruined his life, how he'd given me everything, how I was ungrateful. I blocked his number after the third one. I didn't owe him my attention or my forgiveness. The night before I left for college, Dad and I sat on his porch talking about everything and nothing. 2 years earlier, I'd thought he didn't care about me. Now I couldn't imagine my life without him. I'm proud of you, he said as we watched the sunset. Not just for getting into college, but for having the courage to find the truth and fight for it. I'm proud of you too, I said, for never giving up, even when it seemed hopeless. I could never give up on you. You're my daughter. Those words meant everything to me, not because of biology, but because they represented a choice. Dad had chosen to keep fighting for me when it would have been easier to walk away. Gary had chosen to manipulate and control rather than trust and support. The difference between them wasn't just about money or lies. It was about what they believed a parent's role should be. Dad wanted to empower me. Gary wanted to possess me. I graduated college 4 years later with a degree in criminal justice and a specialization in family law. Dad and Sarah were in the front row at my graduation, along with Connor, Mom, and Grandma. We were a non-traditional family, but we were a real family. Gary had sent a card, returned to sender, since I'd moved and hadn't given him my new address. My first job was with a nonprofit that helps children navigate custody disputes and parental alienation cases. I knew exactly how those kids felt. The confusion, the guilt, the sense that loving one parent meant betraying another. The most important thing, I would tell them, is that this isn't your fault. Adults sometimes make bad choices that affect kids, but those choices don't reflect on your worth or your right to be loved. I thought about Gary often in those early months of my career, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of clinical fascination. How had he justified 12 years of systematic manipulation to himself? How had he convinced himself that stealing my money and blocking my father was for my own good? The answer, I realized, was that people can convince themselves of anything if the alternative is admitting they've been wrong. Gary's identity was built around being the good guy who stepped up for his family. Admitting that he'd actually been the villain would have required rebuilding his entire sense of self. So he doubled down instead. He turned me into the ungrateful daughter and Dad into the deadbeat father, because that narrative protected his ego. But here's what Gary never understood. Love isn't about ownership. Real love doesn't require erasing someone else from the equation. Real love trusts that there's enough room in a heart for multiple people. Dad proved that every day. He never badmouthed Gary, even after everything came out. He never tried to erase the positive memories I had of my childhood. He understood that acknowledging Gary's role in raising me didn't diminish his own importance in my life. You can have complicated feelings about your stepfather, he told me once. He did raise you for 12 years. That means something, even if he did it in the wrong way. That's the difference between a secure parent and an insecure one. Dad didn't need to be the only man in my life to feel important. Gary couldn't handle sharing me with anyone. 5 years after everything came out, I got married. Dad walked me down the aisle, with Connor as one of the groomsmen and Mom in the front row. It was the family Gary had tried to prevent. Messy, complicated, but real. Gary wasn't invited, but he sent a gift anyway. An expensive vase with a note that said, "I hope you'll think of me sometimes." I returned it. Not out of cruelty, but because accepting it would have meant opening a door I'd worked hard to close. Gary's gift came with strings attached. They always did. It was another attempt to insert himself into my life on his terms. I'd learned to recognize manipulation when I saw it. The last I heard, Gary was still selling insurance in another state. He'd remarried a woman with 2 young children of her own. I wondered sometimes if he'd learned anything from what happened with us, or if he was repeating the same patterns with a new family. I hoped for those kids' sake that he'd changed, but I also knew that change requires acknowledging wrongdoing, and Gary had never been capable of that level of self-reflection. 6 months after my wedding, Mom called with news. Gary had been arrested for forging signatures on insurance claims. Old habits, apparently. Some people never learn, Dad said when I told him about it. The important thing is that you learned. You broke the cycle. He was right. I had broken the cycle. Not just of Gary's manipulation, but of the broader patterns that had allowed it to happen. The tendency to prioritize peace over truth, the willingness to enable bad behavior rather than confront it, the assumption that love requires sacrifice rather than respect. My children would grow up knowing all the adults who loved them. They would never be forced to choose between parents, or be told that loving one person meant betraying another. They would know their worth wasn't conditional on their behavior or their gratitude. And if anyone ever tried to manipulate them the way Gary manipulated me, they would recognize it immediately, because I would teach them what real love looks like, and what it doesn't. Sometimes the people who claim to protect you are the ones you need protection from. But sometimes, if you're lucky, the people who really love you will fight for you even when you don't know they're fighting. Dad fought for me for 12 years, and in the end, love won. Not the possessive, controlling love that Gary offered, but the real thing. The kind of love that wants what's best for you, even when it's hard. The kind of love that trusts you to make your own choices and supports you when you do. Gary tried to erase my father from my life, but he couldn't erase the love that connected us. In the end, that love was stronger than all his lies. And that's the most important lesson of all. Real love always finds a way.